Want to hear your conversation with Leslie after the show? Go to lesliemarshallshow.com/members.
Welcome back to Hour 3 of the Leslie Marshall Show. And this is Brad Bannon. I'm pinch hitting for Leslie tonight. In this hour, as we usually do when I do the show, we're going to have our political roundtable, which some people cheer and some people fear. Our guests on the roundtable tonight are Randy Borntrager, who's the political director for People for the American Way, and our own executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, let me try this out. I have a tweet here, which I'd like to read, and both of you can react to it. And this is from Largimus G, and Largimus writes, "More money shouldn't equal more voice." Randy, why don't you start at briefly describe what happened in the Supreme Court this week, and what happened and the implications.
Well, basically, the Supreme Court sided with the nation's most influential donors on a 5-4 decision to basically open the floodgates on political influence in American politics. Even worse, just when we thought we had one of those moments, can't believe this happened. Well, it happened again. What our nation's wealthiest don't need is even more political influence. So basically what this allows is the mega donors, those people that the top 0.01% of campaign donors who contributed more than 40% of all money in the 2012 elections are now to basically be able to write a $3.6 million check to political parties and politicians and, through different mechanisms. And basically there's no limit of the amount that they're allowed to give to different party committees, which basically allows people to give almost unlimited. The previous rules were pretty generous as it was, with over $100,000 were allowed to donate through all these things. And so the Supreme Court said, well, that doesn't matter. In fact, we're going to double down or $3 million down on this, and basically wiped away rules that were put in place after the Watergate scandal to prevent corruption that have already been challenged and upheld at the Supreme Court shortly after the signing law. So basically what you're saying here is that the Roberts Court took something that needn't have been up for discussion and went and just shattered that wall. And really the only thing that's next could be, and most likely is going to be on the docket at some point, is campaign contributions in their various forms.
It's really staggering when you take a step back and, all of us, Randy, you, Michael, we're very involved in this on a day-to-day basis. So it's, easy to get caught, I think, in the little details, which are very important in these issues. But when you really do take a step back and you look at what our government was like and what our political process was like before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision in 2010, and now you fast forward to this week after Citizens United and after the McCutcheon case, now corporations are allowed to spend unlimited amounts of money anonymously on elections, and these big donors, which you so aptly pointed out and has been pointed out in the media this week, about, I think, something like under 600 people were able to spend this much money last year.
591 to be exact.
Thank you, 591, and that was at the previous mark of, okay, I'm going to shell out $123,000 this election cycle. I mean, let's just take a step back and fathom that. That's not what happened, people. That's what it was. What it is now is, in some counts, something like, if you combine the numbers, $5.9 million can be spent. And I think the challenge is $123,000 is a lot of money to most people. So it already seems ridiculous. And, but, you could think, okay, maybe 3-4 years pay, I could think about how much money that is. But then you get to a number that's going to be more money than most average Americans, working families, are going to make in their whole lifetime. And that tells you how much money someone is going to be able to put into one election cycle. And you know, most politicians, the reason that they will, during the breaks will come home to their districts, their constituents already get such a small amount of face time, and half of the time they do, it's for a paid dinner or some type of fundraiser. Well, you just took away the incentives, what incentives were left, I should say, for the representatives to actually pay attention to their constituents, and now they have even less incentive to, because they can just do what Chris Christie did the other day and just fly out to Las Vegas and meet with Sheldon Adelson, who is, a mega rich donor. And what does he need the people of New Jersey for? For instance, what does, one of these congressmen need the people of their district for anymore? It completely removes the people from the part of the process that's supposed to be able to get their members' attention, because let's face it, a lot of them aren't doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because they want their votes and they want their money. Well, now they don't really need their money anymore. So it's only going to make things worse. And, at the risk of sounding, even more depressing or fatalistic, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think you're going to see in the next election cycle even more money spent. And where does this money go? It usually goes towards negative ads. And people are eventually going to get sick and tired. I just hope that people get sick and tired before it's too late, because it's not enough anymore to just, complain to your friends or post something online. People actually have to get up, get out of their house, get off their butts and organize and show up places and peacefully protest and make people take notice who are in people of position of power who can do something about this. So whether you're going to tell your elected representative, I don't care how many ads you run, if you take money from these people, I will vote you out and get as many of your friends to, until they stop taking money from these people, because that's not going to change unless we get a constitutional amendment, or unless, like you and I were talking about, Brad, we have a Democratic president when one of the conservative Supreme Court justices, not saying we want them to pass away, but retires or passes away, because it is a lifetime position. So in the meantime, that's what we have to do. Otherwise, we're just going to be staring this in the face every day, and it's not going to get any better.
Randy, do you want to say anything?
That's exactly right. It's that type of activism that needs to happen. We have to realize that not only for president, but also for our Senate, that are confirming these justices, that are putting justices forward. We can do something about it in 2014, and we can certainly do something about it in 2016. The other ways about it, we can start organizing at the local level. Over 500 towns and cities, including huge ones like New York and Los Angeles, have already gone on record supporting amending the Constitution. Certain states like Colorado have already gone on record with the state ballot initiative, informing their members of Congress to push for an amendment. So whether it's a constitutional remedy, or whether it's simply reversing a 5-4 conservative, also right-wing Supreme Court with a more balanced, reasonable 5-4 center-left court, that's what's really at stake here. We saw what they're willing to do. Usually, you only take these type of drastic actions, or this type of willful snubbing of the vast majority, 7 in 10, say that there's too much of money in politics. They snubbed it on a 5-4 court, and boy, what would happen if they had 6-3 or worse? We have it close now. We have to continue to push, and that's really the only remedy we have is to get engaged and to act.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you there, Randy, but we will return to this topic of big money in politics after the break.
Well, there's a lot of benefits to some of the kind of mutually reinforcing pro-democracy reforms that are really coming together for a reform effort on this. But that being said, the idea that we're going to sit here and try to come up with a better system when the entire ecosystem of what we're facing is collapsing with this court is the bigger problem, right? And so the one way that I look at it, as being an activist myself and being someone who's fighting every day against these type of policies that only benefit 1%, or in this case, the top 0.1%, 1% of the 1%, is to educate our population about what's really at stake in the election. And so, that requires an education system that's funded on the local and state level, that requires a president to maintain funding for vital programs, and that requires that everyday voters understand that they have to go out and vote and hold their members of Congress accountable. I think you said it very, very well earlier, Brad, that money can't buy elections, especially with an informed electorate. What it can buy is those politicians that become kind of addicted to that money, and then start passing things that aren't in benefit of a average middle class family or struggling families, and they start catering towards these super mega privileged people. And so before that happens, or I should say it probably already happened, but to maintain what we have and to build off those strengths, and we have the Senate, we have to increase that and hold it this year and take back that House of Representatives and keep that presidency so we can take back the Supreme Court. That's the near-term solution, and I think that's the only way that we're going to do this, because, as the gentleman before rightly said, passing some of these things on and either change the court or you pass a constitutional amendment. I think that we can focus on 2014 elections first, and then we can move on from there and keep doing what we're doing on the local level and keep pushing up.
Mark, what do you think short of public financing, which I think is the best idea, I just don't see it happening, how do you think we can deal with this problem, big money in politics?
Well, it's interesting. I was actually just talking to Randy off air, and, I've progressively got more and more aware of this situation and involved in this situation. And the good news is a lot of great organizations have become a lot more accessible to people for free on the internet. And People for the American Way, I sign up for their email list, and they do a really good job of keeping people informed and putting out events that you can actually get involved with. So right after the Supreme Court decision came down, People for the American Way and some other good organizations like Public Citizen, you see all the different organizations that banded together and organized these protests, which happened all over the United States. And no matter how much these people put this money into elections, if it keeps not having a huge rate of success, like you brought up, Brad, like Crossroads GPS and Karl Rove, I do think they'll still keep putting the money in, but election cycle after election cycle, people are going to start to notice these companies putting the amount of money in that they are, and if politicians, which they are, start voting for the policies that support these companies that gave them this money, people aren't stupid. I mean, now that we have these resources online, it's a lot easier to share this information and educate people. One of the things that you brought to my attention off air, Brad, that we were discussing before the show is how things change in the United States and how politics is very generational. And I thought one of the things that you mentioned to me that I found interesting is what usually changes. So, my hope is that people go and sign up for different events at pfaw.org and follow them on Twitter, and just do a lot of other activism that they can do. Even if it's just calling a congressman or a congresswoman, if you can't get out and join an event or sharing a tweet or a Facebook message or just reading up on this stuff, the more educated you are and the more in your face that you can be to these politicians, eventually they're going to have to listen to you. And I think as that hits a peak and people start to get more passionate about it, you're going to see it change in the Congress, you're going to see it change in the Senate. But then what you said, Brad, is to change these laws, likely it's going to have to go back to the Supreme Court. And not to take your point away, why don't you tell everybody what you were telling me off air and how that kind of works?
Well, I'm actually very optimistic about the future of American politics. And I say that as someone who thinks the system right now is god-awful horrible. But it was also the system, money in politics was also god-awful horrible in the 1890s. Corporations may have had it even better back then. They essentially had individual senators who basically worked for the company and represented the company's interests. For instance, the senator from Rhode Island, whose name escapes me, was executive in one of the big financial companies. I can't remember his name, but they were outright bought and sold. Everybody knew it, and no one made any pretense of it. But it so revolted the American people that it raised this movement, the progressive movement, which essentially created a lot of measures to limit the influence of corporations in politics and elections. And that's because generations change. What I think happening now is, and the reason I'm optimistic, a new generation of Americans is slowly taking control of American politics. They're called the millennials. They're people born since 1982. My two kids are millennials. And they have a very progressive and reform-minded interest in politics. And as they become a bigger and bigger part of the electorate, they will start calling the shots instead of baby boomers like me, who've made a god-awful mess of the system, I hate to say, because some of my best friends are baby boomers. Randy, let me ask you this. Short of, it seems to me Americans pay very little attention to this problem. If you look at a national survey, you'll see very few Americans who give a hoot about the campaign finance reform system. They're much more worried about the economy, health care, the budget deficit. They're probably not any more worried about campaign finance reform than they are global warming, unfortunately. So how do you convince the American public this is something to get angry about?
Well, first, I just want to address your earlier point. I mean, I have a lot of optimism, and in the face of all of this that's happening, it seems like the sky is falling. But at the same time, they need this money because we're winning. Our demographics are winning. They're relying on a shrinking pool of older white voters, upper class, most privileged people, while we're growing and our ideas are spreading, and so they need money to fund operations that will suppress the vote or discourage people from voting. And so it's only a matter of time before, like I was saying earlier, the population and people are going to realize that they need to get out and get activated and vote. So I encourage everybody just to keep talking and keep telling people what it's about, and the millennials, like you said, as well as demographic changes in this country, will hopefully overtake the money. But why is it not the biggest priority? Well, some places it is. I mean, whether that manifests, you're a pollster, Brad, sometimes it manifests itself in a throw the bums out mentality. Sometimes it manifests itself of, an insider versus an outsider and a need for different people to represent them. Sometimes it represents different values and things. And sometimes it's not just a question about, is money in politics a big deal? Sometimes it's, do you think that your interests are being represented and those type of things? And I'll leave it to you and the pollsters to understand how to crack that nut. But what I do know is
Randy, unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you off there because we're almost out of show tonight. I want to thank our political round table, Randy Borntrager, the political director of People for the American Way, and Mark Grimaldi, noted political analyst and executive producer of The Leslie Marshall Show.